Allie's going to help us this morning light the Advent candles. We're going to do that this time. Again, the Advent season is our remembrance of the coming or the arrival of our Savior. We've now into our third candle. Our first was hope. Last week we talked about faith, and today we light the joy candle. Thanks, Alan. Well, if you guys know me, I'm a guy that's pretty honest, brutally honest, some might say. I might have said a little prayer when I saw snow in the forecast, and I was trying to get out of a double header here in the pulpit. So my apologies if it's a little slippery on the way home. No, it's my pleasure to be able to share another wonderful topic in this Advent season. I'm going to start off though talking about the DVR. Yes, the DVR, in my opinion, may be one of the top 10 inventions of all time. I mean, what better thing can I can record something on my own time and watch it when it fits me best. Not only that, I get to watch an hour show in 40 minutes. I mean, I get a third of my time back. The truth about why I enjoy it so much, though, is that I hate commercials. I mean, if you're with me and I want to watch a show that I haven't pre-recorded, I'm going to find show number 1 that I want to watch, and then I'm going to flip through and find a backup channel, number 2, right? So as we're watching channel 1 and the commercials come on, I flip over to channel 2. Anybody else do that? All right, so I'm not alone. The problem with that, Pat, is that my family gets mad because sometimes I get into channel 2 and I don't flip back to 1, and I don't flip back to 2, and then we don't watch anything, you know? So it can be kind of aggravating. But even though I hate commercials, I got to be honest too, I really enjoy some. I'm really a fan of the Geico series. I think the Geico guys are masterful marketers. You've got the gecko that's in this Geico. You've got the so easy a caveman could do it. You know, everybody saves money on Geico, so happy, and do a happy scene. The one that I really get a kick out of is the one where they start saying, well, everybody knows you save 50%. Well, did you know? And that Pinocchio, you know, it's not a good motivation. You have potential, you have potential. No, I like that commercial. So I'm a big fan of the Geico series. Hudson right now is a big fan of the Progressive series. He's a big fan of House of Baker Mayfield. You know, those are some good ones. Meredith, she likes the Tide commercials and Peyton Manning. But Alyssa, really, she's back with Hudson on the Progressive commercials. She likes the ones where they say, you know, we can save you money on insurance, but we can't keep you from becoming your parents. And it's like a memory trigger. As soon as you see that commercial, she thinks back of all the time since the last time we saw that commercial of things I've done to remind me how I'm becoming my parents. So where in the heck am I going with these commercials? There's one commercial that kind of came to mind when I was preparing this message. And that's what commercials are good. They're good about seizing, you know, your thoughts and pointing something out to you. And that is the Snickers commercial series. You know what I'm talking about? Well, this is an ordinary scene that's going on. And in this scene, one of the characters gets portrayed by, you know, a famous person that can really exaggerate the role. And finally, everybody in the scene's like, hey, dude, you're not yourself. Take a bite of this Snickers. They take a bite, poof, they're back to themselves, right? Well, if you catch the end of that commercial, it says this, that you are not you when you're hungry. You're not you when you're hungry. Got a couple stories to share about that. Some ladies in the crowd, I'm getting some looks right now, so I think I'll pass up some of those. And you really get on to my point this morning, that is that you are not you without your joy. Think about that for just a second. You're not the Christian that you can be without your joy. So, of course, this morning's sermon, I want to focus on our third week of Advent and the joy topic. And last week we talked about how to keep faith in these tough times. Now maybe one that's even more of a challenge, and that is how to keep our joy during difficult times. I want to start, though, by coming up with a definition for joy. This is D, so definitely don't waste any ink on writing it down. And it's also kind of wordy, but to me, joy is an attitude that God's people choose to have, not because of happy circumstances, but because of God's hope and promise. That's kind of long, so I tried to shorten it to this. Joy is a positive attitude God's people have because of God's hope and promise. What I'm trying to draw, the point here in my mind is this, and that is there's a big difference between happiness and joy. Okay? To me, happiness depends on things that happen, happenstance. What's going on shapes our feelings. I think joy is more of a choice. I think being happy is an emotion. It will come and it will go, where joy is more internal. It's an attitude. In fact, you can actually be joyful in sorrowful times. You can always see the difference here. I mean, let me boil down this way. There's a reason that I haven't taken my family yet to Disney World. Quote, the happiest place on earth. That's because I know we're going to have a great time. And it's going to be happy. We're going to enjoy the food and the shows and all the rides. But as we walk out of the park, I'm going to be like, not happy on how much money I just spent. See, I'm one of those guys that suffer from buyer's remorse. Doesn't matter if you're listening. Lord willing, we will go someday, just for illustration purposes. Don't want to damage your joy. But no, the point is this, guys. Happiness is temporary. Happiness is temporary. Joy is long-term. So this morning I want to look at some things as I try to reflect on what is it that keeps me from always having joy in my life. What are the things that are attacking my joy? And as I look at these three things, you'll be surprised that we see these same three things in this Christmas story we saw this morning put on to our kids. The first is this. One of the first things that I think can attack our joy is resentment and bitterness. Resentment and bitterness. The cold hard truth is that at some point in our life we're all going to get hurt. We're all going to be offended. We're all going to get wronged. We're going to get rejected, betrayed, you name it. And if I were really even with a small audience like this, I bet I could sit around and across the entire sampling of us could come up with at least one of us that's been hurt verbally, mentally, physically, emotionally. I wish it could go all not happen. But the truth is we just live in a broken world. The truth is we live in a place where people will hurt people. And I want to be real clear in this, that I'm not saying that we shouldn't have the emotion of anger and frustration. I think it is still a healthy emotion. What we've got to be careful, though, is that emotion doesn't fester and work its way into our attitude of resentment and bitterness. I think John could attest to this more than any. And I think there's lots of people who have lost their joy because of resentment. And when I think about it more in depth, and I don't want to go too far because I don't want to lose a thought here, but it's if you break it down, it's almost a very wasteful activity. It's such a consuming, wasteful time or energy. What happens is there's a hurtful event, and instead of just letting that happen and putting it aside, we replay it in our mind over and over again. And who is really reenacting at that point the hurt? It's us, you know what I mean? It goes on our mind and it builds till it becomes resentment and frustration and bitterness. And if you think about it, the person that hurt us, have they wasted any energy since that point? They haven't thought about it once. They haven't stewed over it. No. It went on. They're down at Mom's having an ice cream cone. If we're not careful, we can allow that emotion to become more than it needs to be. Let's look at this in the Christmas story. When we turn over, you can look at Luke 2 and Matthew 1 and 2. We're going to be bouncing back and forth between both of these. But when I think about this, I think I see it in the character of Joseph. I think Joseph had every logical reason to be resentful, to be full of anger, to be full of frustration. Not only at Mary, but even at God. I mean, here he was. His wife-to-be becomes pregnant. Right here in the center of a scandal in Nazareth. What you got to understand during this time is that Joseph and Mary were betrothal. Now that's a big word, a fancy word to say. It's really, at that time, was a formal engagement. It was a written contract, and you'd be surprised to find out that a lot of times there was real exchange of property, land and money, as two parents joined a son and a daughter. And during this, the only way to absolve that contract was just like if you'd been married. You had to issue them a certificate of divorce. These contracts are on file at the synagogue, just like we do stuff at the courthouse today. Very public. So Joseph had every opportunity to take his anger of now Mary being pregnant outside of marriage. He knows it's not his child. And in a very public way, could have drug her through the synagogue and through the town and publicly put her away to divorce. Let his anger turn to bitterness and resentfulness. But let's see what he does in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 19. It says, because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law. What that meant is he knew he could issue her that certificate of divorce, that he could put her away. And yet, he did not want to expose her to public disgrace. He had in mind to divorce her quietly. See, I mean, here he had the chance to drive that stake of revenge. But what does he do? He chooses to turn away his anger and his frustration. Instead, Joseph chooses grace and to let it go. And we know the rest of the story, that the angel comes to him and says, hey, this is really supposed to happen, and this really is an angel, this really is from God, so don't put her away at all. But at that time, he had a choice to make. And I know that this is maybe some of the strongest medicine to swallow. That when we are hurt, that when I get hurt, that I need to result and turn to grace and to let it go. It's just not in my makeup, it's such a hard thing to do. But if you don't want that to turn into resentment and bitterness and steal your joy, that's what you got to do. The second thing I want to look at is stress and anxiety. Stress and anxiety, I believe, can attack our joy. If we're honest with one another, I think we can all talk about how we experience it, how that stress and anxiety is in our life. Everywhere we turn, it just seems like it's around the corner. It's ready to creep in at the first opportunity that it can. You guys are in school. You've got your homework, then you've got the test, and you've got to pass the test to get to the next grade. And just all this stress. Are you in virtual or are you at home? Did I turn it on Google Meet or did I turn it just on and on, this stress? And you think, oh, hey, as soon as I'm out of school, it's all going to go away. I'm going to move off to college. Woo, it's party time. It's all gone. Well, I hate to tell you, there's stress in moves. There's stress in moving away from home for the first time. There's stress in moving to a town you've never been in. There's stress moving to something that's different. It's there too. You think, well, as soon as I get out of college and all those exams are over and I get to work, it's going to go away, right? No. There's stress at work. There's stress when you start a new job. There's stress when you hate your job. There's stress there too. What about relationships? Are there stress in relationships? Does she like me? Check yes or no. It starts then. Do I ask her out or do I not? Does she like me or she doesn't? Is she going to reject me or is she not? And then you get to dating and then it's like, is this the one I really want to marry? And then you think, well, we'll wait once I get married. You're like, hey, don't want to stay married. It's there in relationships. It's there in illness. It's there whenever yourself or a loved one is diagnosed with cancer. It's there when a stent or something mechanically has to be put in someone's heart. It's there when you test positive for COVID. The point I'm trying to get at is if we really are honest, stress and anxiety are inevitable, right? It's something that we just have to be cognizant of and have the way that we're going to manage it at our fingertips. So let's look at the story here, the Christmas story, specifically Mary. If you think about it, don't you feel like that this miraculous conception? She's going to give birth to the Messiah. Think about it. She's now going to have to give birth to someone that hundreds of years and several generations has been looking forward to. And then it's going to be the Messiah, so she's not going to give, birth to the perfect child. I mean, listen, I had a manual. I forget what the name of it was. I was going to grab it off the bookshelf, but tell you how to parent. She didn't have one of those little instruction guides. And most scholars believe that she was somewhere between the age of 15 and 20. I mean, so what we got here is a very young person, a very young woman that is contraction pledged to marry Joseph. She's now pregnant outside of this arrangement, and she's in this small town in the middle of this event. You know what they say that small towns like more than collecting their local sales tax? A good scandal. So, can you imagine the 9 months of stress that she felt walking just up and down the streets as people gave her the look? Reminds me of the scarlet letter, the mark that she had. I mean, this was a stressful situation. Then you add on to this the fact that as she's getting close to birth, she has to get on a donkey and take a two-way ride on the back of the donkey down to Bethlehem to give birth. Talk about stress. I can remember we were about a week from having Hudson the very first time, and we were going to take a trip in our nice, comfortable GMC Envoy, nice plush seats, air conditioning thing, for a 1-hour trip from Oklahoma City to Alyssa's parents in Gulfstream. Can we do that? Well, what happens if the baby comes? Now we're at St. Mary's or Mass, and my doctor's at Mercy. And we went on for days about, should we go or should we not go? I mean, these are real-life things that stress is there in almost all of our decisions, and Mary was there too. So let's see how she handles it. I'm now in Luke, the first chapter, in verses 26 and 30. It says, in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a village in Galilee, to a young virgin girl named Mary. At that time, Mary was legally engaged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of King David. Suddenly, the angel appeared to Mary and said, "Greeting, highly favored woman, the Lord is with you." Frightened and disturbed, look at her reaction. Frightened and disturbed, Mary wondered what the angel could possibly mean by this. The angel said, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You've been chosen to God for his purpose." So all that has boiled down to this, and her response is in verse 38. We move down to verse 38. It says this, Mary answered and said, "I'm the Lord's servant. I'm willing to accept whatever he wants." See, what we got to be willing to do with all this stress that's in our life is to do these couple steps. Take a breath. Remember that God's in control. And all things are going to work out according to his plan. I mean, that is so hard when we get into the mundane, day-to-day stuff. But if we just step back and say, you know what? Like Mary, I'm going to trust God. And what works out is God's plan. The last thing I want to touch on that can affect our joy is when we are in a spot that damages our joy, if we stay there, what's going to happen? Our joy is going to get damaged, right? When we're in a situation, in a place that's affecting and eroding our joy, if we stay there, it's going to happen. To give you a real-life example on this, I'm going to get very personal. See, except for about 5 years when I was 17 to 22, and I was actually a little bit in shape, I have struggled my entire life with being overweight. You know, I get heavier than I want to be. I lose 15 pounds, I gain 20. I lose 20 pounds, I gain 40. Even when I had my 40th birthday, I lost 75 pounds. I was going to make a change. And fortunately, I stand today here in front of you, heavier than I've ever been. Being overweight does not make me happy, and it also works to erode my joy. But what do I do? I mean, I ask myself this question because I have every opportunity to pull out of my driveway, go down Purdue, all the way to Washington, Washington to Willow, Willow to Grand, and Grand right into my office, and not drive by Brahms. But I don't. I turn on my drive, turn on to Cleveland so that I can hit Willow. That way I got choice of Subway for breakfast, I got McDonald's, I got my Brahms, I got my Sonic. And every now and then I go all the way down to O&K to J's for donuts. But anyway, I digress. I have every opportunity to quit putting myself in those situations that I know I'm going to fail. But I just don't. And if we don't try to get ourselves out of those situations, it's going to affect us. Let's look back at the Christmas story. I'm in Matthew's account now in the 2nd chapter. He's talking about how the Magi come to see the star. They're going to go find the king of the Jews, and they're in search. And they come to King Herod, and they say, King Herod, we're here. We see the star. Where is this king of the Jews? And he's like, I don't know. I don't have a clue. So he calls the wise people and the priests of the Jewish people and say, okay, if he's here, what are they talking about? So they look back at prophecy and they go, hey, prophecy says it's going to be in Bethlehem. So he sends them to Bethlehem and says, hey, once you find him, come back to me so I might know where he's at. See, King Herod had some ill intentions in mind. But what happens is that the wise men, as we find out the story, they find them, they're able to present the presents, they're able to worship, then they're told to leave a different direction. And when King Herod finds out about this, he is furious. He then sends his army to go out into that region and to kill every every male child from the age of 2 and down, so that he can kill any opposing king that he might face. Knowing this, an angel comes to Joseph and says, take Mary and Jesus and go to Egypt until King Herod dies. See, there was a very dangerous and a very real situation that could have spoiled the joy of all of God's plan. Did he leave him there just in spite? No. The better path was to move out of danger's way. You know, that's something that I am really going to try to work on as Monday gets here. I always start on Mondays. Do this. But the truth is, when we're struggling with something, we've got to find a way out. You know, for me, I've got to find a way to not go to Brahms. For those that may be struggling with alcohol, you've got to avoid the liquor store or the bar. I don't know what your sin is. It's not that important. But whatever it is that nag that is leeching on and attacking your joy, find a way to get out. Find a way to get out. As we go back to the Snickers commercial, what does it say? You're not you when you're hungry. You're not you without your joy. You're not you without your joy. And so I just ask you this. Have you lost your joy? Are you just going through the motions because you just don't want people to see, you just don't want others to know that deep down inside you might be struggling, or you might be trying to work this out and things aren't going the way that you hope? Maybe right now there's some anger in your life that's on the verge of festering into resentment or into bitterness. Maybe it's just the stress of COVID and all that's going on, just the stresses of life. It's there like a little devil on your shoulder that's just attacking your joy. Or maybe it's you're stuck in that situation you just can't get out of. When you think about it, the answer becomes really clear. We need it, specifically, I know I need it. We need help from heaven. I need help from heaven. You know what that help is called? That help from heaven is called the Savior. I want you to listen and remember what the angel said when he announced to the shepherds in the field. He said, I bring good news that will cause great joy for all people. Today in the town of David, a Savior, not a superhero, not a friend, not a quarterback. He sent a Savior. And the Savior's been born into you. Guys, I don't know about you, but I need a Savior. I need him next week. I need him next month. I'm going to need him next year. I just don't need him on Judgment Day. And I'm going to need him there a lot. But I need him all the time. I need him to be there. And if we didn't need a Savior, I don't think God would have sent his only son to die on the cross, do you? If we didn't need that Savior, would he have sent his son? This is where I want to pick back up to where I left off in Hebrews last week. Not intending to be here again, but in Hebrews, the 11th chapter, we had that scene where William Wallace is on his horse, the blues on his face, and he's talking about don't lose your faith. Turn over to Hebrews chapter 12. Because after he goes through this hall of fame of remember this person, remember them and what they did, you can be like them. Do not lose your faith. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2, right after this hall of fame, he says this, fix your eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. And here's where the key's at. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. What was it for? It was for the joy set before him. He endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of God. Folks, he did it for your joy, and he did it for my joy. That we can experience what King David said, that restore to me a new soul so that I may enjoy the joy of my salvation. Restore in me a new soul. Restore it so that I can enjoy my salvation. That's the whole reason that Christ came. In a nutshell, guys, that is the Christmas story. It was for joy. So again, if you're losing your joy, or your joy is under attack, turn to the Savior. That's what the Christmas season is all about. At this time, I'm going to extend an invitation for some of those that might be considering putting on Christ in baptism. Today's that day. Snow or no snow, let's get it done. And if today you need to come forward and ask for prayers of the believers that are here, that they might help you in your place in life today, if you're battling your joys under attack and you need the prayers of the body here, please come this morning as we